be very, very quiet.
Yeah, a little too quiet.
Show your mouth. Show your mouth.
So, A Quiet Place is a post-apocalyptic horror suspense thriller made by Jim from The Office, featuring actual wife Emily Blunt, a bunch of young actors ranging in age from 14 to, 8, one of which is played by deaf actress Millicent Simmons, whose name you're absolutely going to hear again as you wander the internet, and these kids are expected to carry the emotional weight of the film, and they do. And this is the kind of movie where even discussing the premise in any greater detail sort of robs you of the fun of seeing it unfold in front of you, so I just want to say, this is my favorite movie I've seen so far this year. Don't worry what it's about, just go see it.
It's a not so bad, it's a nicer place. Shut up for your face.
Alright, if you want more detail, then we can get into it. I'm going to do a spoiler-free review first, and then a full-on, no-holds-barred spoiler review, and then some hot takes at the end. Ready? So the gist of this story is that the Earth appears to have been overrun by Lovecraftian monsters that hunt by nothing but their insanely sensitive hearing, allowing them to pick up sounds a mile away. This is particularly inconvenient for humanity, since sound is not only our primary means of communication, but also a byproduct of nearly everything that we do. Our main characters are a family of farmers who have been able to survive through a unique mix of living out in the isolated countryside and being fluent in sign language on account of their deaf daughter. This allows them to shift into an almost entirely silent existence while still being able to maintain something resembling a normal life and coordinate complex tasks that help them survive. Now, the first time I saw the trailer for A Quiet Place, I knew this was definitely my kind of movie. I'm a fan of horror when it's done thoughtfully. The premise offers a lot of room for imaginative problem solving. The use of silence meant that it would, at least aesthetically, stand out against other movies that have come out in a while. And I love movies that make good use of scene-stealing child actors. I wish that there was more of those. What surprised me is how well A Quiet Place does everything else. This is such a solid movie with every moment contributing to some combination of world building or character development or foreshadowing or theme, and sometimes all of those things at once. That might sound kind of like a backhanded compliment, like, well, it's a competently made movie, the scenes are all important. But if you know me, I'm actually really picky with stuff like that. I can get into specifics in the spoiler section, but for now, I'm just going to emphasize that these basic building blocks of storytelling, as simple as they are handled really haphazardly by a lot of modern studio movies, let alone horror movies. So this is a big deal to me. But the reason this is so important is that it creates a good narrative skeleton to give weight to all the fun, scary scenes. And yeah, this movie is scary. It's the real deal. I was tense through the entire thing. I think the entire theater was. I have never seen a theater so silent. There was like no rustling, no pouring out candy. It was so nice. It was like being absolutely alone with a big movie. It's like, you know, when you watch a movie where the character has to like swim underwater for a long time and you involuntarily hold your breath along with them to kind of see if you can do it. It's like that, but for being quiet. And that's because A Quiet Place knows how to wield its silence intelligently. There's dialogue delivered through occasional whispers and sign language, but whenever the movie can, it tries to tell its story purely through visuals, expressions, and sound design. So imagine the character-focused storytelling from the first half of WALL-E or the prologue of Up, mixed with the suspenseful heists from Mission Impossible or Rafifi. Now imagine that it all lasts 90 minutes, and that's your movie. Now go see it because I want to talk about spoilers. That's literally all I can say. Get ready for it. 3, 2, 1. Horror movies make up the greatest percentage of wasted potential in cinema. I'm so sick of movies about 29-year-olds playing 19-year-olds who stand around waiting for their turn to get eaten by the inbred radioactive gerbil or whatever. Those movies are always disappointing because the screenwriters were so proud of themselves for coming up with a clever premise that they figured their job was done. What makes A Quiet Place successful is that the movie knows what all great horror movies know. The story is never actually about what it says it's about. The Shining isn't really about ghosts. The ghosts are a tool to explore an unstable, abusive father taking his feelings of inadequacy out on his family. Dawn of the Dead isn't just some zombie movie, it's a satire of consumerist society. And A Quiet Place isn't about daredevil monsters that force people into silence, it's about how a family's grief forces them into silence. The fact is that monsters aren't actually all that scary. Just check out what society has done to poor Cthulhu, our wiggly, madness-inducing alien god. Monsters are cool, they're neat, they're our buddies. As far as I can tell, if you want your monster to actually be horrific, you need to intertwine them with a relatable, real-world fear. Something like sexual assault, uncaring fascist regimes, short-sighted Western interventionist policy, paranoia, clowns, and A Quiet Place chooses to use its central gimmick of a silent family to investigate what makes families silent. There's a reason the movie begins with the death of the youngest child. But now we've got a central theme, one about grief. More than the ear monsters, this grief is the single thing that dictates every part of the story. Each character is defined by it. The undervalued daughter racked by guilt, the son paralyzed by his own mortality, the mother just trying to restart an impossible normal life, and the emotionally repressed father who communicates solely through inventing new coping methods. And these also reflect the obstacles they individually have to overcome before the end of the film. The family doesn't audibly speak to one another because the monsters, but you also get the sense that they probably wouldn't have that much to say to one another anyway. And this is the kind of thing I'm talking about when I say that the movie infuses character and theme to elevate what would otherwise just be a B movie with a neat hook. I'm not saying it's like King Lear or something, but that's kind of the point. This level of intentionality in storytelling should not be difficult. This is the basics, but it's something that's missing from a surprising amount of mainstream movies. And that means when the movie is ready to let loose and have fun with its premise, these characters aren't just pawns in some set pieces. They're working out their own issues and insecurities. Everything from the Rube Goldberg contraptions they build to the dumb, stupid mistakes they make become expressions of the characters and their values. And that's so much more interesting to watch, at least for me. And speaking of characters and their values and their mistakes, there's a fourth level of this review. Only the most pretentious analysis lies beyond this point. Are you ready? The post-apocalypse as a setting and a genre has always kind of sat uneasy with me. Sure, it's fun to imagine a world where it's just you and your friends getting to hang out, conveniently avoiding the responsibilities of adult life, facing no problem that can't be solved by a barbed wire on a stick. But the fun of rebuilding the world in your own image out of the ashes has taken on sort of a gross tone, surprisingly, because the temptation is to view this kind of media as more than escapism. It's a validation of our suspicions that true progress is found solely in our ideas and way of life. And the only impediment to that progress are the stupid, incompetent other people and society and governments that are out there kind of cramping our style. It's the ultimate frontier wish fulfillment narrative. You're the only one who can bring true civilization to this corrupt, lawless world. This is why some of my favorite entries in the genre are movies like The Road or It Comes at Night, which specifically build up archetypal survivalist philosopher cowboy heroes that we're so used to in these kind of movies and stories, just to show us that their entire paranoid, trust-no-one attitude does not make them noble everyman, it makes them ineffective and even villainous to a certain degree. And while A Quiet Place doesn't really go for that bleak of an ending, the moral is similar. The father is a clearly talented man who devises, in part or in whole, some awesome methods to survive these tiny Cloverfield monsters. He isolates himself in his basement workshop, a martyr to the cause of defending his own family, and in the end, literally a martyr. But the best he can ever do is kick the can, buy them a little more time and a little more time and a little more time. A real permanent solution isn't discovered until his daughter enters the basement in the final scene. Thanks to her unique perspective, having a hearing aid, she's able to determine how the monsters can be defeated. A solution that comes too late because the father believed that overcoming this threat was something he had to do alone. As the head of this family, it was his sole responsibility. And it turns out that the secret to fighting this evil was not in isolation, it was through collaboration. A collaboration with his disabled daughter that he explicitly forbids throughout the movie. And you can read this ending as everything from a metaphor on how to properly run a marketplace of ideas to a feminist deconstruction of patriarchal power structures. But what I like most about it is how well it works as a payoff to the central theme about grief. This family was driven into their own separate corners at the start of the movie and attempted to construct a functioning community this way, and it never really worked. The final third of the movie is an onslaught of meticulous plans falling apart one after another, and it leaves lasting damage on this family. But this is also when the family is forced to join forces, metaphorically freeing themselves from the oppression of their grief and learning how to overpower the monsters at the same time. This is good storytelling. The monsters aren't gone, just like these people aren't suddenly over the death of two of their family members, but the final note is one of hope that they finally recognize how to work together and overcome this together. And as far as movies go, this is pretty basic storytelling. But even a basic story can be executed thoughtfully, and A Quiet Place leans hard into making its simple story the most important thing on screen at all times. Every monster moment, each sequence of racing against the clock, is contextualized by a sense of who these people are and what is at stake for them narratively. And in my experience, that's the number one thing you can do to make a horror film horrifying. Think back to the most famous scary monster movies. They always have a memorable main character to fight against. Sometimes that main character becomes as iconic or even more so than the monster does. And I know, because people tell me this all the time, a lot of people will think that I'm overblowing all the character and structure stuff and say, no, this movie is good and it's popular just because it does monsters good. It does the scary scenes well, the camera work and the tone and the setting. And yes, it does do those things well. But I also don't think you can ignore that the aesthetics being done well only matter if they're built on this kind of solid core that this movie has. And I think that's why this movie is a really good opportunity to talk about these kind of things. This movie is really popular. It's really accessible. I think this is a really easy way to get into this topic. So if you really want to come at me and tell me that I'm just way overthinking a fun popcorn horror movie, I'll just leave you with this.
Shut up! Shut up!
Shut up!
Shut up! Shut up! Shut up!
Shut up! Will you shut up?
What's the matter, you? Hey!